Hi everybody, Marcus Condo, the MA Properties Online team. Martini Monday this week, we're going to come up with something a little bit different. We're going to look at buyer essentials. So what are those key things that a buyer needs to know before they buy a home? This evening we're going to unpack house types, specifically single families versus multifamilies versus condominiums, something that I have to say I thought was rather simple until I actually took the covers on it. So welcome to Martini Monday. Hi everybody, Marcus Collins to the MA Properties Online team. So as I said before, new series here, Buyer Essentials on Martini Monday. So with that, I will say cheers. A margarita this evening because the weather's been so good over the last 3 or 4 days. I thought it was just appropriate that a kind of summer drink with a margarita would be perfect this evening. So we're going to take a look at the essential things that a buyer needs to know before they buy a home this evening. First thing, with the place I thought I would start would be around house types. By that I mean single family versus condominium versus multifamily. Something that I actually have to say before I put this together I thought was going to be pretty straightforward, and I'd have about 5 minutes of content here. Turns out I've got a little bit more than that, I think. Let's see. So let's kind of unpack those three and see the key differences between the different house types we have today. There we go. There we go. So let's take a little look, first of all, at single family. So many first-time home buyers will be used to renting a home, where much of the responsibility, of course, rests with the landlord as opposed to them. So the key thing about a single family home is that, guess what, it's all your responsibility. You, the homeowner. You're responsible for the mortgage payments, for the insurance on the home, the repairs to the home. That's different if you're renting today, of course. The taxes, the bills, the gardening, you name it, you, the homeowner, are responsible for all of that. The benefit, of course, is that you're not relying on somebody else that may or may not be very responsive to actually do some of those things, like the repairs, for example. You can also insure yourself against some of those things as well. But ultimately, you're responsible for your little world, your castle, if you will. It's kind of your world, you're responsible. You can, within some bounds, do almost anything you want to that home. One of the things you can't actually do to that home is, of course, tear it down. I say, of course, because I get this question quite often. So I've bought a single family home. Can I actually knock it down and build another home in the same location? There are some restrictions, of course, in terms of how big a home you could build, how close you can build to the lot line. Lots of restrictions on what you can build, but here's the key thing. You can't tear a home down and if you have a mortgage on it, because guess what? You've done an 80-20, 80% the bank, 20% you. The bank actually owns 80% of the home. And they'd be a little bit disappointed if all of a sudden that home was knocked down underneath it. Because guess what? They own the home. They own 80% of that home. So that key kind of question, can I tear it down? The first question I always ask to a buyer who asks that question, and I get it quite often, is, are you going to get a mortgage? Yes, I am. Okay, so how are you going to knock it down if you don't own all of it? Now, how do developers knock it down? Of course, they don't have a mortgage, or they have different sorts of mortgages. But ultimately, that question of, it's all your responsibility, but you don't actually own all of it. And so you are restricted just in terms of tearing down. Clearly, there are some restrictions in terms of what you can do to the home as well. In terms of expanding it, there are restrictions that the town puts on you in terms of how big you can make it. When you do things inside the home, often you will need a building permit. If you're, for example, doing any electrical work, any plumbing work, any substantial work for the home, you almost inevitably will need permission from somebody else to do it. But it's your decision to decide that you want to update the kitchen. You just have to get a couple of other people's permission to do that, specifically the town. So single family home, essentially your responsibility, exactly as most people expect. The difficulty comes, or the difference comes, when we start looking at condominiums, because this is the one that I thought was going to be relatively straightforward, but when I actually kind of picked it apart and looked at different aspects of it, there's a lot to a condominium, and I think much of what I'm going to talk about here, and I'm just really giving you the basics, if you will, because there's a lot of detail here. The devil, as ever, is in the detail. So I'm going to try and give you a kind of the basics of it, but even then I found that it was actually a lot of content to try and put over, and I didn't want to go on too long. So really, once you're looking at condominiums, really all host house types for that matter, but specifically when you start looking at condos, perhaps even multifamilies, it's very important that you understand exactly what you're getting into. So let's kind of unpack a little bit the story around condominiums. So first thing is, there is some common area. That's a key difference, of course. I'm going to do that. It's quite warm even down here. I'm in my basement at the moment, and it's really quite warm down here. So key difference now between a condominium and a single family is that there is some common area, some shared area between yourself and the other units in the condominium. Now, that may just be a 2 or 3 decker. So the shared area, for example, in a double decker or a triple decker for that matter, might just be some stairways, and it might be just the basement. I'll talk more about that in a moment. But when you're thinking about an apartment building with many, many units, there's a lot more shared area. The externals of it, the gardens of it, a lot of different kind of areas. There's lots of different configurations of condominiums too. As I mentioned, 2 and 3 deckers, they're very common. Specifically here, apartment buildings, they're usually more modern, but there are still some apartment buildings when you think about going in closer into Boston. We don't see them that much as you come a little bit further out into Lexington and Alton. A few, but we see a lot of those as you go into Cambridge and Boston and so on. A lot of apartment buildings. Might also be a side-by-side, what sometimes we'll call a townhome. It's a townhome, they're side-by-side. So the shared area is clearly the common wall between those units. Remember, a single family, there's no shared area. It's all yours. It can also be cautious on this one, a kind of mix of standalone and attached homes. We have a development here in Lexington, just one that's just almost completed, actually, still going, Liberty Ridge. It's a mix of townhomes and a mix of single-family homes. But there are condo association associated with that. There are condo rules that are associated with that. It can also be what appears to be, in some cases, standalone homes. Pond's an example. There is a little bit of shared area between the units, but there isn't that much. They are spread out. But remember, the roads going in, that's all shared area as well. So there's some shared or common area between the different units. That's the key difference between a condominium and a single family. There may also be some shared services. Usually in the older condominiums, where there's perhaps a 2 or 3 decker, there might be a single water meter, for example. There might just be that one water meter feeding both units. In some apartment blocks as well, we often see there might be a single heating system. So the heating is all covered by the condominium. So, it may also be, as well as some shared area, there may also be some common services that are shared between those units, for example, water or perhaps heating in some units too. So there's a lot of variability, if you like, in terms of what's common, what's shared, what's actually specifically for that unit. Kind of varies a lot in terms of that. So a lot of care required, understanding, okay, what is mine, what am I ultimately responsible for, and what's the condo association or the condo responsible for. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Here's a key difference too with a condominium. If you've got a double decker or a triple decker, each of those units can be sold separately. So unit 1, unit 2, unit 3, or 42 to 44, whatever it is, each of those units can be sold separately. It's different from multifamily, which I'll talk about in a moment. But so unit 1, unit 2, both of those can be sold separately. But there's usually some common area. So even though you're buying unit 1, you're usually buying some area in the basement, for example, that is common. So it's quite not uncommon to see a basement area in a double-decker, for example, that is split. 2 halves of the basement, almost 2 halves of the basement, are for each unit. So the left side might be for unit 1, the right side might be for unit 2, and then there'll be a small area down in the basement which is common, where perhaps they've got the meters, for example. So again, be cautious as you look at the condo and you go down to the basement. Okay, which is actually mine, which is for unit 1, and which is actually for unit 2, and which is common. And that's always explained. That's a key question you should ask as you're looking at that condo. What's conveys with the house that I'm buying, what's not mine, and what's common. As I say, in a double-decker, one on top of each other, that's usually, right side is unit 1, let's say, left side is unit 2, and then there's a small common area for the meters, for example. So, as you're thinking about what's conveyed separately, you may also be buying into some actually common area in this example, which is where the meters are. But so understand what's yours and what's the other units. That's key. The other key difference, thinking about that conveyed separately piece, is that there is a condo association that has the rules and regulations on how those condos can be used. So it can vary again. Sometimes it's simple. You might have 2 units or a triple decker that may just split the bills as they come in. So it's written in that as the bills for the insurance or for the water meter, if there's a single water meter, it's split 50-50 or 60-40 depending on what the rules say as the bills come in. So it can be very simple, so almost no overhead. As you get to larger complexes, it's quite common to see a professionally managed condo association with, in many cases, more regulations, some more costs as well, because of course the condo owners, have to pay for the management association or for the management of those units. So again, ask the question, how is the condo association being managed? Is it simple? Is it complex? As well as asking clearly, what that cost is, and I'll talk more about those costs in a moment. As well as that, the condo association has the rules, what you can and cannot do. Thinking back to the single family, you essentially, and perhaps the town if you're looking to expand, make the rules. If you want to have a dog, you can have a dog. If you're in a condo, that may not necessarily be the case. There may be something in the condo association that says dogs are not allowed. The unit cannot be rented. There are those rules and regulations that you have because you're in a condo. And it's very important that you review those condo documents before you do the purchase. It's also done afterwards, but look at those. If you've got a dog, make sure that the condo association will allow dogs, because you don't want to get down the road and find that, before you get to purchase and sale, actually, the condo association says no dogs, so therefore you either have to get rid of the dog, which clearly you will not want to do, or you cannot move forward. So as you're looking at the home, it's important, if you've got things like, for example, a dog, does the condo association allow you to have, an ordinary dog in the house? Separate from service animals, that's kind of a different question, but if you have, we have, as many of you know, Pseudo, the canine super sleuth. If we were to move to a condominium, then we would have to ask the question, are dogs allowed? Can we actually have the dog? So I use that as an example, but there are a lot more. And say another one, perhaps smoking is or is not allowed. Can you rent the unit? That's another question. Perhaps you're thinking of buying this for a couple of years and then I might want to rent it. Does the condo association allow you to do that? So that's a key question to ask as well. So review those condo documents before you make the purchase, just in case there's something in there that says, you know, hey, you cannot do the following, and that may be really important to you. So that's an important thing to think about. So the all-important fees. These are key, because the fees can be quite large, and it's not uncommon to see many hundreds of dollars per month. That is the condo fee. If you're looking at, for example, a managed building in Boston, it may be even in the thousands. But if you think about where we are right now in that kind of, you know, suburban area, it is quite common to see those condo fees to be quite large, certainly within the hundreds of dollars. And before we think about that, if we talk about what's included and that, important to think about that too, because you're buying a single family, essentially you're responsible for a lot of it. You know, you're responsible for the unit. There is no condo association that does the external maintenance and things like that, for example. But the condo association fee of $400, $500, $600, that's money that you have to spend every month. And the question you should really think about is, do I want to spend that $600 on a condo fee, or do I want to take some of that money and put it to my mortgage for a single family? And that's really a key concern. Many people many buyers looking at that condo fee thinking, you know, that condo fee doesn't actually give me anything. You know, I get something for it, clearly, external maintenance and so on, the garden maintenance, for example. But am I better off taking that money and actually channeling it into the mortgage payment and actually jump into a single family? Because in many cases, a condominium is a kind of stepping stone into a single family, or a stepping stone as you come down, as you're downsizing out of a single family into a condominium. Perhaps you don't want to be bothered with snow removal and so on. So it is, in some respects, a little bit of a stepping stone, certainly as you go up the housing ladder. They are, in many cases, much cheaper than single families, not always the case, but in many cases. So it's seen as a kind of a stopgap to move you to the next one. And it's important to look at those condo fees and say, you know, that's a big number of perhaps $600. Yes, I'm responsible for a little bit of that, but it's not $600. Am I better off, you know, taking that 600, putting some of it towards my mortgage payment? So something to think about around condo fees, and be very cautious when you look at those condo fees, because they say they're not tens of dollars, they're often hundreds of dollars, and in some cases where you have a managed apartment, they may even be in the thousands. So it is a big number to think about. So what does it cover? The one thing that's kind of common, if you will, is that it covers insurance on the common areas. That's usually called master insurance. When you see the term master insurance, that's the insurance on the common areas, because the condo association is responsible for those common areas. That may be the roofs, it may be the garden areas, it may be the roads coming in. There's a lot to that, what that master insurance covers. What else it covers, you need to look. It varies. It varies widely, in fact. I mean, it may just be external yard work. I mean, it may be as simple as that. That's all that's covered. It covers, you know, the external, the master insurance and some external yard work. On the other hand, it may cover an awful lot. Utilities, snow removal, external maintenance, and so on. So it's very important that you look at not just the number, the fee. It's important you look at that too, of course. But not just looking at the fee, look at what's included, because that can be key. You know, you may be paying, yes, a lot of money, but guess what? An awful lot is included in that fee. So it's important to look at that as you kind of, you know, weighing up, you know, do I go condominium with a fee? This is what's included. Do I go single family? Yes, you know, there is no condo fee, but I'm responsible for the following aspects of it, homeowner insurance and so on. It's important also to mention that master insurance is not homeowner's insurance. You are still responsible for your unit. The master insurance is responsible for the common area. Sometimes, not always, worth asking the question though, you can get a cheaper rate on your insurance if you use the same company that does the master insurance. Not always the case. This is something to ask and shop around, clearly. Insurance is something that you can shop around for. But as you're looking for insurance for a condominium, ask the question, who is the insurer for the master insurance for the common areas? Because it may well be that it could be cost us advantageous, cheaper, to actually use that master insurance company for your homeowner's insurance. You don't have to, that's important to note, but it may well be that it's a little bit cheaper if you do that. So condo fees are there. They look like a big scary number, and often they are a big scary number, but look at it in the context of what's included, and also if you go single family, how much of those costs are you actually going to have to pay? For example, the exterior maintenance. If you have to replace the roof in 5 years' time, yes, the condo association is going to cover that based on my condo fees. If I own a single family, I am responsible for that. So that's the kind of trade-off that you're looking between condo fees and a single family. It's often I put this in here, it's kind of sometimes associated with condos, but often for single families too, where you have a single family within a subdivision. It may well be that that subdivision has some common area. Almost always, not exclusively, but almost always, it's external to the property. So for example, some common area, some common areas, yard areas, you've got the condominiums built around a common area that has to be, the gardening has to be done, it has to be mowed and so on. Maybe snow removal is included sometimes as well. So, and that's usually called a homeowners association. Not really appropriate to condominiums, that's a condo fee, but more specifically around single family, where you have almost always where you have a subdivision, where when they built the subdivision, they put some common area, usually external, and that has to be maintained, and you're responsible for that fee. If you live next to a golf course or on a golf course, almost inevitably there will be a homeowners association fee. So all of those kind of things. Also, again, not common, but I have seen them. There may well be a common or a shared septic system where they built a subdivision, and you've got a series of homes. Instead of putting a separate septic system, that's a bit of a tongue twister, that a separate septic system for each home, they might create a common leaching area, for example. You're responsible for paying the maintenance and upkeep of that. Partial part of that, of course. So look as well, even if you're looking at single families, single families, there may also be a homeowners association fee. Now, I should say that all of those fees need to be disclosed. Important that they're disclosed. And often, again, this is where you should be asking your agent, are there any increases in that condo fee coming? For example, if all the roofs need to be replaced, if the roads need to be repaved, thinking about, for example, of those of you who may have seen Potter Pond here in Lexington, there are lots of roadways around Potter Pond. The homes are separated quite a lot. Are there any known, you clearly can't know the unknowns, but any known increases perhaps where the condo association comes and says, you know what, I haven't got enough money based on what you've been paying in your condo fees to pay for new roofs. So therefore I'm going to go back to all of the condo associates, all the condos, and say, hey, you need to pay some extra money in because I don't have enough money in my reserve to be able to pay for example, a new roof. If that's known, and it's usually known, 12 months or so in advance, it doesn't necessarily come as a surprise, but if it's known, that needs to be disclosed too. So as you're looking at a condominium, find out what the condo fees are. Even with a single family, find out what the homeowners association fees are today. And then ask the question, do you know if there's going to be any what they call special assessments? Do you know if the condo fees are going to increase substantially over the next 12, 24 months to pay for some extra work? So those are key questions you need to ask. And as a listing agent, the listing agent should know that information. again, key information to impart that, no, we don't know of any increase in the condo fees. Or yes, actually, we do know of an increase in the condo fees or a special assessment because the roofs will need to be done and we anticipate a $N$1,000, $5,000, $10,000, whatever the number may be, increase or one-off assessment in the next 24 months to pay for this. So very important as you go into that condo purchase that you ask all of those questions. What's the fee, any increase in the fee, and any special assessment? Because that clearly will impact you, because once you buy the unit, you are then responsible for any increase in the condo fee or any special assessment that may be weighed over the course of you being in there. So, a lot to condo fees, a lot of detail in there. I'm sorry about the detail, but I kind of want to impart as much as I can. But key questions to ask, much more questions to ask around condominiums than there are about single families. So be cautious as you're kind of thinking about that condominium purchase. Okay, let me finish off with multifamilies. We do see multifamilies, and there's a key difference between a multifamily and a condominium. And here's the key difference. They can be the same configuration, usually, not always, but usually a double or triple decker. So one on top of each other or a triple decker. They're usually that configuration of multifamilies. But here's the key difference. You cannot convey Unit 1 and Unit 2 separately. The whole unit, Unit 1 and Unit 2, for example, if it's a double decker, both of those convey or sell as one unit. You are buying both units. That's different from a condominium where you can sell the top unit and the bottom unit separately to two separate people. You cannot do that with a multifamily. It is a single unit. So that's key. That makes it very popular with specific people, really. Developers like multifamilies because it isn't that different. The configuration of a multifamily isn't that different from a condominium. So a triple decker, let's take that as an example. The configuration of that triple decker of 3 units with some area that's divided in the basement as well as some common area is exactly the same in a condominium as it is in a multifamily. So physically they are very much the same. The difference is purely legal. And so what a developer might do is buy a triple decker, renovate each of those units, create a condo association, and sell those units separately. Remember, the only difference between a multi and a condo, in the case of this triple decker, is a legal separation between those 3 units. So developers very much like multifamily homes because you can take that triple decker as my example and create 3 condominiums, and 3 condominiums will sell for more money than a triple decker. So developers find it very, very advantageous to buy those units, renovate, and then condoize, not a great word, but they condoize them essentially, creating 3 separate units. Investors and homeowners like them too because you can rent the unit out. You might, let's take a double decker for this time, as they're quite common. You might decide that you want to live in the upper deck, the upper unit, but rent out the lower unit. So that rent you get, income from the lower unit, will offset, of course, the mortgage that you're having to pay on the multi because you own both units. So investors and homeowners like multifamilies because they've got the ability to rent that lower, in this example, the lower unit. An investor might of course rent both units. So you're buying a single home, but you can rent them separately. You can't sell them separately. That's the key difference. And also, many homeowners like it because if they have an extended family, of course, they can live in the top unit, as my example of the double decker, and actually rent out, not really, but their extended family can live in the lower unit. So it's popular, even though the concept of a multifamily doesn't really, kind of make sense in this day and age. They're actually popular, say, with developers to split them, investors and homeowners to rent one or both units out, and then a homeowner to have their extended family in one unit, they are living in the other unit. So even though that concept seems a little outdated, it actually is still are very popular. And if you look at multifamilies, you'll see that they sell very quickly. Even though the idea of buying 2 units doesn't make any sense, it actually does for a large number of people. So that's a multifamily. Everything else kind of is similar in terms of its layout, and that very similar to a condominium. There's no condo fee with a multifamily, I should add. Condo fee only comes when you split the 2 units and you're starting to share the costs. You have to divide the costs, if you will, in terms of bills and so on. As a multifamily, it is a standalone unit. You own all of it. You're not sharing the cost with anybody. So in that respect, there is no condo fee unless you decide you're going to split it into condominiums and then you put the condo docs and so on in place to do that. So that's a multifamily. As I say, it seems like a kind of outdated idea, but actually it's very popular with a number of different homeowners. So that's my not so quick, and I apologize for it being not so quick. I thought it was going to be way quicker than it actually was. Introduction to home types and buyer essentials. As I say, I thought it was going to be really fast, but sorry about that, it wasn't. Lots of detail there, and specifically around condominiums, but also what you can and cannot do with a single family and what you can and cannot do with a multifamily. So I'm sure it's raised lots and lots of questions, so feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions around what I've just talked about. What should I be looking out for? What should I not be looking out for? We're here to answer all of those questions. So that was our first of many, I think, buying essentials on Martini Monday. So I want to thank you for watching, and hopefully we'll see you next week or the week after when we talk about another idea that buyers need to know before they buy a home. So with that, I will say goodbye.